everybody, it's Missy again. So more on stained glass. Today I'm going to talk about cutting curved pieces from stained glass. Our first video is all about cutting straight lines, which is where you want to start, especially if you're just learning how. Curves are a little bit more tricky. So we have the same tools. We have our Grosser pliers, our running pliers, our glass cutter. This time I only have a plastic ruler because a straight ruler isn't going to help us cut curves. I have a Sharpie and my little pattern pieces. In this particular case, my little pattern pieces come out to be a little star once I arrange them all together with little curved inside. So let's see, 4, 5, 3, looks something like this put all together, which is really fun. So yeah, I've got some of my pieces already traced using my Sharpie. So I'm going to talk a little bit about conservation of glass and then move into cutting our curved pieces. So first thing, when I talk conservation of glass, what that means is whenever I am cutting glass pieces, at least in a classroom setting, I want to use as little glass as possible. So right here, I've arranged my two pieces so they're sitting on the side, and I have this first line that goes up across the entire piece of glass. Remember, I cannot cut glass in small sections. I can't just cut partway through a glass and then like cut out a little corner. I have to chop off whole sections. So this is my first cut, that line that separates out this glass that I don't plan on using from the glass that I do. Over here, on this piece of glass, I have a similar thing kind of happening where all of my piece is not dead center of my glass. Even though I like this section of glass more, I have it over here so that I can chop off this whole section here and cut from here rather than having all of this. I have a couple students who are not preserving as much glass as possible, and this means that there's going to be smaller pieces that kids can't use, and it's just scrap from what the rest of the kids have cut out. If at all possible, you want to try and use all of your glass. Right here, this is going to be a piece that I use almost completely. So this is the ideal thing, is you find the piece that fits best so that you don't have to do so much cutting. But if you do have to cut off the part you're using and keep the rest of it for someone else. All right, so now we're gonna go into actually cutting a curved piece of glass. So we're gonna start with this little piece here, and what I want you to notice is that right here, I have two curves. I have a convex curve and I have a concave curve. If you don't remember what those means, convex means it bends outwards, concave means it bends inwards. So this bend is bending in towards my shape while this bend is bending out. This bending out shape is much easier to cut with my glass cutter. This one right here is almost impossible. You can do sometimes shallow cuts in, but what I want you to do for at least beginners or learners is to just cut across like here where this line is, and then we'll use a grinder to grind this one out. We won't be cutting this one with a glass cutter, and I'll show you how you can do this one. So first thing I want to do is actually cut my two pieces apart. That way I will have both of my glass pieces that I'm using, and then I will start showing you what we're going to do. All right, so word of advice, first thing I noticed about kids doing things wrong is they would flip this over and try and cut this way. That side doesn't cut, this wheel does. So first thing I'm gonna do is go across. All right, like that. And I can use my running pliers or I can use even pressure with my hands to pop it apart. If this were smaller pieces of glass, I would or a larger piece of glass, I would have definitely used my running pliers. In this case, since both fit pretty easily in my hands, this is what I did. I don't suggest that you do that unless you feel confident in yourself. If you're feeling a little bit more iffy about cutting glass, don't do it that way. It will just make your life easier. All right, so first off, this side over here is super skinny. So I have the option of trying to cut it, but if I do, I will probably use my running pliers and then the Grosser pliers to chip off the edge rather than trying to use my running pliers because there's not enough space on this side for my running pliers to grip to. So I'm going to start with my little wheel and I'm going to very carefully follow along where it's supposed to go. When in doubt, cut a little bit less glass than you intend to cut, because then you will have a little bit of extra room and you can more accurately cut where you actually want using the grinder. Some of these don't want to come off, dang. Right there, it doesn't want to go off. All right, so that's pretty close to what I want to cut, but it's got some sharp edges, so I do need to be careful. All right, next what I'm going to do is this straight line across here because that's my next largest line. And as I said, I'm just going to go across. I am not trying there's not enough space on here, on this side for my running pliers to grip. So I'm going to use the flat side of my Grozer pliers on top to try and see if I can pop this apart this way. And it doesn't look like it wants to cut very easily as well, but since I plan on grinding most of this side anyhow, that's not a big deal. So I'm just gonna break off little chunks. And that way there'll be less for me to grind. All right, I do have a lot of mess this way, so I am gonna have to be very careful. Do your best not to touch this stuff with your hands. It makes your life difficult. All right, now for this curve, what essentially you're gonna do is a series of straight lines that are all slightly offset from one another. So my first straight line is going to mostly follow this line here and go like so. After that, I will do another straight line, as many as I can until I get all the way around my curve. And if I decide to stop here as my last cut and just grind the rest of this, that's what I'm gonna do. It just depends on how easily my glass is deciding to cut. And this one clearly is against cutting right now. It might be that this is one of my more wobbly, less flat pieces of glass, but who knows? So I'm gonna start here. I'm gonna go across. All right, and this one does have enough space for my running pliers. Something else that I've noticed is that remember that the running pliers have this like duckbill curve, like so. Make sure that the top of that curve is your upper portion. I have had a couple kids have issues where they couldn't quite get the running pliers to work when they had them upside down. All right, so there we go. That's my first piece off. And I'm going to continue cutting off these little slivers along those lines that I drew. But I'm probably going to be using my Grozing pliers for the rest because as you can see, there's not that much space for me to grab onto. So this is my piece entirely cut as much as I'm going to cut with my glass cutter. Everything else I will smooth out and carve out with my grinder in the same way that I normally would with any piece that I'm grinding. Since all of my pieces are the same, they're all going to be doing the same pattern because it's just the same pattern piece over and over. That's how I'm going to cut my curves. You want to cut your curves the same way. Do be very careful. Shallower curves than this are going to be easier. Deep curves like this tend to be more difficult and or more time consuming. Also, you can see that it's a lot of glass that's essentially not going to be used for anything. So it's a little bit of a waste of glass. So do be careful if you choose to have curves, make them a little bit shallower to make your life easier. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get this ground down and then I will see you back to show you the final piece. All right, and so here it is after I have ground it down. Something to be aware of is that I did have to go back and forth a couple of times because my Sharpie would kind of like disappear in the violence of the grinder. So I did have to come back and forth a couple times to make sure that it still fit, to re-put my outline on there, so on and so forth. And now that I've got it all done, it pretty much perfectly matches my paper pattern. If you have something that is drastically different than your paper pattern, like something went horribly wrong somewhere, whenever you are test fitting, you will need to double check that everything is still going to work. If you need to recut a piece, you might need to recut a piece. If you're pretty close to your piece, paper pattern piece, you'll be fine. Just make sure that it looks pretty good. All right, that's everything. Bye.